Let's dive into the big games of the week. We'll go in chronological order as they happen, starting with the big noon Fox game, Oregon 35, Ohio State 28. Let me throw these few things out here, and then we can discuss. Generally, bad ball for Ohio State. And their offense was pretty damn good. Stroud threw for 450 plus yards, three receivers over 100 yards. The run game was real lackluster, only 128 yards on the ground. But I think offensively, there was enough firepower that they could hang in the game. Defensively, they gave up over 500 yards. The RPO absolutely murdered them. That's something that you and I can definitely deep dive into just in terms of the schematics of it. And this is a bad defensive trend from OSU stemming from last season. It's continued into this one. Bottom of college football in defense for Ohio State with a top 10 total offense. This is a really unique place for them to be. And I think all of the questions right now about this program are, what do you do with that defense hack?
Yeah, it's just weird, man, that we're even having this conversation, because you obviously know I'm preaching to the choir with you, but the Ohio State teams that I played, I mean, they were a two-headed monster. Like, offensively, they could put up 75 points in the blink of an eye, and defensively, it was just really tough to get in rhythm and stay on schedule. So it's a really unique situation going on up there in Columbus right now. And I think this year it's even more accentuated due to the fact that they have a young guy pulling the trigger. And although that he has made a ton of plays up until this point in the season, and it kind of came off to a rough start early against Minnesota, got his rhythm, but you said it was rainy. It's a big game. He's got some jitters. I thought he settled in really well. And you and I were talking just before this, like, I think week 7, CJ Stroud gives them a chance to win that ball game. And that's just a maturity thing. And I think that's like the weird thing for Ohio State right now is their offense can be explosive. They have a young guy who's still growing in the system and still feeling things out and getting a rep and a feel of what it feels like to have that pressure of the game on you and being able to make plays in that moment, because you can try to simulate it all you want. Those guys were playing with nobody in the stands last year. I mean, I think the last game he probably saw with people in the stands was in high school. And there's nothing like that when it comes to the shoe, big time marquee matchup, like huge, like it's just a different thing. So when you get in that situation, you need reps at that. And I thought overall he kept them in that game and played well, but it's like Ohio State doesn't have that defense to be able to make up for his young mistakes that they've had in the past. And it's just going to be really curious. And I think it leaves Ohio State in a vulnerable position throughout the year until CJ takes that next step. And it kind of sucks because you're pushing him along on a path that it takes a while. But I think that their hopes of being able to be in the college football playoff kind of rides on him being able to develop faster than I think a lot of people hope or expect.
Let me ask you this, because you see the game totally differently than I would see the game, and you played the position before at a very high level, and we both agree that CJ is a good quarterback who's young. So what do you think he needs to do between now and the end of the year where you want him playing at his best? Like, what are the things that you see that he could be doing better right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think like he had a couple of chances to win that game at the end. I mean, I think he missed, was it Wilson or Olave one time or he threw one and he had the other one open. I always get those two mixed up because those two are both incredible.
You can change them out.
Yeah, they're interchangeable in my eyes. But I think it's just like, those are the things where, and it's hard to explain. It's just the natural progression of guys. Like you eventually start to feel those things in those moments. It's like but it's magnified at the quarterback position because everything goes through you. But it's the same thing for like a left tackle, like or a DB. Like, okay, I got burned on this once. I knew what it felt like. I saw that. It's just that innate ability to kind of take a mental picture, the feeling, the everything that's going on, and then be like, all right, I'm not going to let that happen again. And I think like for him to be able to do what he's been doing, I mean, like you said, he threw for over 450 yards. He did everything in his power with his limited exposure to those experiences to keep Ohio State in that football game. And it's hard because I feel like we're just discrediting Oregon, but I think Oregon came in with a great game plan. They executed really well and they won that football game. But, this is a Big Ten podcast and we are talking about our like George Whitfield in the After Dark show likes to say, the five families are one of our five families from the Big Ten in Ohio State. And it's just hard. Like I said, I don't know how you're going to do it. I don't know how you necessarily have him progress the way he needs to progress in order to be able to make a run at the college football playoff. I just think that ultimately it's going to be him being put in that same situation again against a Penn State, against a Michigan, and against probably one of these sleeper teams, a Michigan State or somebody like that in the Big Ten, where they're in that football game and he now makes that play that puts them over the top. And I think that that's going to put a ton of confidence in him and a ton of confidence in the team. But like I said, it's hard to discredit what he did this week. I mean, I thought he played really, really well, all things considered.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's the same thing. And it's hard to necessarily pinpoint it. And you described it, but I think that, like, if you were to put words to it, the best way to describe it is a literal feel for the game. Like, you get game reps. Like you said, you're able to replicate things differently after you've felt a rep. And it's certain things like that interception that he threw on that, it might have been like a 3rd and 18 play. And it's like, would they have been able to convert if he would have thrown the ball away? Who knows? But you have to give yourself another chance. You can't just give the ball away there. Or a couple of those 4th downs where it was 4th and short. And I know he was kind of a little bit banged up and they're trying to nurse that. But those are opportunities where you pull the ball down and you just take it yourself, and that's what you learn as a veteran player when you take those chances and when you don't. And you said it, and I will echo it. This conversation is not at all to discredit what Oregon did, because they are a legit football team. They have great players. Their defense was down 2 of their best players, and they still played well enough to win that football game on that side of the ball. Their offense gave Ohio State so much trouble. So this isn't necessarily to say that Ohio State should have been head and shoulders better than Oregon. It's to say that this is our podcast to talk about the Big Ten, and Ohio State has some real issues. So this RPO thing is something that we talked about in the last show. We talked about Joe Moorhead and his ability to execute this offense and the difficulties that it puts on defenders. There's always going to be a player in conflict. And Ohio State's game plan to attack it, which I think in theory was a good plan, was to play man-to-man defense, because you get the numbers in the box and it clarifies everything. Because when that linebacker triggers to go get the run, in theory, there should be somebody that has on-body coverage on
disrupt
the pass
timing.
read.
Yeah, you disrupt the timing of it.
But the biggest thing that I saw from Ohio State's defense is a bunch of guys who were playing a step too slow. And I've had this conversation for like 2 or 3 days now on Twitter about Ohio State's defense. And everybody's like, we gotta throw out the single high coverage. It's too hard to play. Seattle was doing it, and then they lost a bunch of guys in their secondary, and they started going to a too high safety look just to change it up instead of playing all cover 3 and all cover 1. And my response to that is multifaceted. Number one, Ohio State had some really good players in 2019 when they first started running that defense. They had those same players in 2018, and they were running a multiple defense, but it was a lot of too high safety looks, and they were trash. So I'm really not trying to hear that Ohio State doesn't have the personnel for it, because they had the personnel for it and were running a system that people want to see, and sucked at that. So we can throw that out of the conversation. Number two, and it's the thing that I mentioned before, I don't necessarily think the game plan was bad. I don't think there's anything wrong with the scheme technically. What I think exists right now is a disconnect between coaching and players not trusting what they see. And that's the hardest part about playing a defense that aggressive is, number one, they don't necessarily disguise or don't try to show anything different. They are who they are. But when you're going to be like that, you have to be fast. You have to be aggressive. You have to trust what you see, because any moment where you're lacking, any moment of indecision becomes a big play for the offense. And quite frankly, that's what we saw. And we can go through all the stats. I feel like we don't necessarily need to do that. But I don't have a lot of confidence that this is a situation that's going to get fixed anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost really, it's because, I mean, you can have that argument about like, all right, are we going to be a quarters team that's going to bend, don't break, and, do our thing? Or are we going to get in the box? Are we going to create some exotic pressures? Are we going to do some other things like that? But at the end of the day, like, and this is something I got taught on my freshman year with Bill, is that like football is a pretty easy game, man. I mean, it's about three things. It's about numbers, leverage, and matchups. So like defensively, if you're going to go single high, like I'm going to throw the football and I'm going to figure out ways how to protect things up, because you guys are giving something up on the back end. If you go too high, I'm going to do my damnedest to run the football.
Absolutely.
Because you're giving up a hat in the box. So like, it's a double-edged sword, man. And I think you brought up a really good point, is that the scheme's the scheme, and you can fit a scheme around all kinds of personnel, right? Like, okay, this is what we do really well, so this is what we're going to do, or this is what we, or maybe someone doesn't even evaluate. We have these types of players. We're just going to put them in there and see what happens, right? And I think that's where it comes down to it. And I think you made a great point, is that there is some type of disconnect. And no matter what the scheme is, players play, and in order to execute at a high level, players need to play fast. You need to eliminate thinking, like you were saying. And I think that's such a fantastic point. And even if you have to go a little bit more simplistic, at Ohio State, to your point, you still have the personnel to be able to basically line up, roll them out in the field, and play with anybody. It's Ohio State, right?
That's what we do.
And it's like one of those things where, maybe there's a little bit of a self-reflection that needs to go on up there in these next couple of weeks, and see, okay, let's get back to the basics. Let's let these kids fly around and make plays. Let's just line them up, base calls, and let them fly around and make plays and see what we do well. And let's stick to that, and then build around it as they get a little more confident, as they start playing a step faster. Now you can start throwing in some of those exotic 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10, 3rd and long type blitzes, where you don't feel like you're giving up a vulnerable shot because you're going to hit home on it, whatever it may be. I think they just need to find out what that identity is and what scheme and style fits their players well enough for them to play at an elite level of speed, which is what they've collected from a talent standpoint on that side of the football.
Yeah, I've got just a few comments off of that, and then I'll end this off with a question. But first comment, you talked about at Ohio State, you should be able to just go out there and play something, and it doesn't matter. And you would know this from preparing against us, but we played cover 4, basically 80% of our snaps, and everybody knew what we were in, but we just knew we were going to execute it better than anybody. We knew based off of what the offense was lined up in, what their tendencies were down in distance, everything, like we had a beat on what they were going to do. So our thinking wasn't about what our responsibility was defensively. It's about where the offense was going to try to attack us that play. And I think that really works. Number 2, you mentioned in a too high system that you lose the numbers in the box. Ohio State this year, their issue is defending the run. Like Mo Ibrahim went off, and then CJ Verdell and all these guys from Oregon went off in the run game. Too high safeties ain't going to fix that problem.
They gave up 200 yards on the ground in back-to-back games. I haven't that's unheard of at Ohio State.
It's the worst run defense Ohio State's had in ages. Like somebody pulled out a crazy stat about how bad this defense is just from the numbers standpoint. But I feel like that is definitely not a fix. And then my final thing is people are clamoring right now in Columbus about how we don't have a Chase Young type player. And I agree with that, but also you played 2 teams that are RPO teams, and every play they basically block it as a run. So those guys can't get off. And when you don't stop the run, you can't force those 3rd and long situations where you can pin your ears back. Ohio State had 1 tackle for a loss in the game. I think the bigger issue is not the pass rush. I think the bigger issue is that guys aren't playing aggressive and downhill. So they got to get that sorted out. My question to you before we move on to our next game, that was an awesome one, is where do you view Ohio State as of right now? Are they a team that you think can still win the East and go to the Big Ten championship? Is this a team that still has a chance to make the Final Four and be a playoff team?
Yeah, and I think obviously all of this banter about Ohio State heading after this loss is oh my gosh, right? Because when's the last time Ohio State has suffered a week 2 or week 3 loss? It's been a while, right?
Yep.
So for me, yes, I still have them. And I was texting you earlier, I kind of did a tiered ranking, they're still in tier 1, right?
Yeah.
For me in the East, they still have a chance. But like I said, this is the year for somebody in the East, whether it be Penn State, whether it be Michigan, whether it be a sleeper in Michigan State who somehow pulls a Cinderella story.
Yeah.
This is the year in the East where Ohio State has shown a chink in their armor. And it can be exposed, or Ohio State can go to work and clean things up and keep about their business. So that's kind of where I see it. I don't think it's a hit the panic button. They ran into a great team. who schemed them up really well with an offensive coordinator who had familiarity with them, and Joe Moorhead, who was at Penn State the last time Penn State beat them. So it was kind of just this whirlwind of perfect situation. Defense wasn't playing great. Young quarterback still getting his feet wet. It was just this perfect situation, and I'll give credit to Oregon, move on, and let's just keep plowing forward for Ohio State throughout the season. And you still have a chance. You still have a shot at this. It's not a write it off, throw the season out, we're done type scenario. And I think it feels that way, but I don't really see it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think especially when it comes to the Big Ten, all of their goals are right in front of them. The national picture gets a little bit more cloudy because you need some things to happen around you if you're Ohio State.
Right.
But I tend to agree with you. Go out there, win the rest of your games, and then you can evaluate at the end of the year.